Both of these texts today point us in a direction that is significant for us as we enter into this season of Lent. A season of, as I mentioned before, of us honestly going before God and asking God to show us things in our lives that need to be changed so that we can move closer to God and closer to one another. The first is the Gospel of Mark. We find Mark, who is the shorter of the two Gospels. He likes to use a lot of quick words like immediately and right now. In this context, we find him giving us the shortest version of the temptation of Jesus. It says simply there that the Spirit sent him into the desert, and he was in the desert 40 days being tempted by Satan. And then it also adds this little one sentence that is not present in any other of the Gospels. It says he was with wild animals and angels attended him. We find in this image that Mark gives us of Jesus being tempted, we find images that many of us may be able to relate to. Number one, we find Jesus being pulled away from a moment in his life when he was being affirmed by God. He's being reminded of how much he is loved by God. And it says very clearly the Spirit took him into the wilderness to be tempted. And we see that as Jesus is being tempted, that there is a battle going on, if you will, between the wild animals, the wild way of the world, if you will, and that aspect of God's presence through the angels. And we find this battle to be described in different ways in the different Gospels. I invite you perhaps this afternoon when you're watching the snow come down to take out your Bibles and look at Matthew 4, the 4th chapter there, and you'll find a more, I guess, detailed account of Jesus' temptations. But for our purposes this morning, let us just be aware that Jesus was tempted, and it was a battle. And it says very clearly that there's a temptation in Matthew 4. It says very clearly that Jesus was tempted, but he did not give in to the temptation. He battled the temptation with three things. He battled the temptation with awareness that he was loved by God. Number one, he was loved by God. There are times in our lives when we are tempted that one of the things that the world and people around us may suggest to us is that we're not loved by God, that we're not worthy, that we're limited, that we're not able to resist temptation because we don't have that power. But it's important for us to be reminded, as it was for Jesus, that he was loved by God, and so are we. And secondly, as Jesus was being tempted, as we find especially in that Gospel of Matthew, we find Jesus not only recognizing that he was loved by God, but that he deliberately and intentionally said that God is in control of my life. There are times in our lives, dear friends, that we are tempted to think that we are in control of our lives, or that circumstances around us control our lives. But in fact, in truth, God controls our lives. And the third thing that Jesus found when he was being tempted was how important it is to be very deliberate and intentional again in making sure that we worship God and God alone, that we don't allow ourselves to be distracted by the other gods of this world. So, as we think about that, let's think for a moment, dear friends, about our own temptation. Now, some of you may say today, well, I haven't been tempted in a while. So just go ahead and take your pulse and let's see if you're still with us, because, we're all tempted. And it's important to notice that temptation is not bad. Temptation in of itself is not a sin. It's part of our human condition. Jesus made that very clear in the letter to the Hebrews. We find it very clearly stated. We have someone, a high priest, who knows what it is to be tempted, that Jesus was tempted in any way. And some of us may ask that question, well, how is that possible? Jesus lived centuries ago. How could he be tempted in the same way that we are tempted? The answer is we have different names for different things, but temptation is anything that pulls us off the path of following Jesus. Anything. And Jesus knows what it was like to be tempted, to be pulled off the path. We know that most clearly as we'll reflect upon in a few weeks from now, as Jesus was going to the cross there in the garden when he was praying. He prayed to God, let this cup be taken away from me. Basically, he was saying, I don't want to do this. Surely there's another way. Surely this isn't the way my life has to end. Surely I don't have to be crucified. Surely there's another way to show how much I love everyone all the time. The response from God was there wasn't any way, and Jesus said, not my will, dear God, but yours be done. And surely most of us at various times in our lives know that temptation of saying to God, surely there's another way. But many times God says back to us, if there was another way, I'd let you know that this is the way of truth and life. But as we're thinking about this and thinking about temptation, I not only want us to be mindful that we're all tempted, but that with that temptation comes the opportunity for us to trust Jesus. To trust Jesus with our lives, with our decisions, with the desires of our hearts, with the dreams and goals around us. To trust Jesus to be the one that will not let us down. To trust Jesus to be the one who will continually love us and want the best for us. I think it's been said that our culture today suffers from a number of illnesses, if you will, symptoms, if you will, of a brokenness. In our current economic situation, even now, we begin to hear such words that we haven't heard in a while. Words like greed, words like selfishness. Those words seem to float up again because we realize that many of us are in the economic condition that we are today because there were people who were greedy, and we even recognize in our own hearts and lives that there have been times when we ourselves have been greedy. But the other side of that coin is there's also that aspect of trust or distrust, more to the point.